and welcome to a new season of the Wildlife Community Podcast. This series, we will be welcoming back birding expert Dan Rouse to our outdoor wildlife gardening studio to introduce us to National Nest Box Week. And we have famed Professor of Biology and author of Silent Earth, Dave Goulson, who will also be paying us a visit. But this month, we welcome friend of the wildlife community and local neighbour, Mary Hinton, who runs a hedgehog hospital just up the road from our Cotswolds workshop. And that's because it's hedgehog hibernation season.
Body temperature drops down to about 4 degrees C, and they probably only have 4 breaths a minute. So everything shuts down. It appears that they're asleep, but it is different to sleep. It's a very, very deep state of torpor.
And I'm here in the indoor virtual studio with fellow presenter Paul, who's recently moved to a new house in the Lake District. And actually, last time we spoke, Paul, you mentioned you just put out a couple of hedgehog houses in your new wildlife garden. Did you manage to spot any hedgehogs before the winter set in?
I didn't know. And I did have a look in one of the hedgehog houses, the one nearest to the house, just to see if I had a resident. No cobwebs in there. But I am hopeful that we do have nesting hedgehogs or hibernating hedgehogs around the gardens. We've got a lot of mature trees here, and of course, what happens in the autumn with mature trees? They drop tons of leaves, and we've collected some of the leaves up from the driveway that were turning a bit mushy. A nice frosty afternoon clearing the driveway, and we created a huge leaf pile, and that's one of several. It's great to have hedgehog houses that you buy, and in the same way it's great to feed hedgehogs that come into your garden with supplementary feed.
Yeah.
It's also great to have them doing what they do in the wild. If you're in a location that is suitable, then leaf piles, log piles, and all that kind of stuff, they're where they would be nesting without human interference. So I try and have a little bit of natural habitat around the garden, and we're lucky in this location to have quite a few of those.
So you're just at the start of your kind of wildlife gardening journey in this new house. Is that what you've been doing so far to make the garden as welcoming as possible for hedgehogs?
Yeah, I think I mentioned last time we spoke that the previous residents must have loved wildlife as well, because it was already in fantastic shape for wildlife. I did see hedgehog poo in the summer last year. Quite a few areas of the garden had little deposits that I was like, I'm pretty sure that's hedgehogs. So yeah, I think we're in a really good position. I'm still in the observation stage, so I'm still watching what's going on.
The hedgehog houses that you have put out, how did you choose where to place them? Where's a good spot?
They like to get cozy, so somewhere sheltered, and preferably with the opening out of the way of prevailing winds, which means that the driving rain doesn't get blown into the entrance. Somewhere near access, although that doesn't matter too much, because if they found your garden, they know how to get in and out. Somewhere that's naturally sheltered from the frost, so if there's any spots under hedges that you notice don't get snowfall or ice patches on when it's frosty, they'd be naturally good spots.
In fact, last time we produced a podcast about hedgehogs, you had an incredible story about them giving birth in your garden, which I was very, very jealous of and was so lovely to listen to. Are you hopeful, if you've seen hedgehog poo in the garden, are you hopeful that this garden is potentially ready for the spring for hedgehogs as well, and that you might actually have nesting opportunities there as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm really hopeful. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether I'll know that they're there or not. We've gone from a really tiny, small urban garden, but we had a nice little raspberry patch, and that's where the mother hedgehog decided to raise her young. And the only input I had really was leaving hay that I'd cut lying around, and she must have seen it and thought, yes, this is the opportunity I've been looking for. So I'll probably do the same thing. Basically, what I do in my gardens is I leave the edges to grow. We're doing the same thing here. It's just that we've got about 10 times more space to do it in. But I will leave some hay lying around that I cut later in the season. That's what Mummy Hedgehog chose to make her nest out of.
But you say you're still in observation mode. You're still kind of learning about the garden. What does that actually practically mean when it comes to hedgehogs?
For hedgehogs, it's a little bit more tricky because they only really come out at night. The chances of you looking out the window and seeing a hedgehog, very, very slim, as opposed to garden birds or anything. So with birds, it's easy. I can see what's coming to the feeder. I can surmise that they might need nesting opportunities and all that kind of stuff. But from a hedgehog perspective, I've observed that throughout the seasons we've been here, we get massive influx of crane flies. So I know for a fact that there's a lot of leather jackets around. So I know that there's good natural diet for hedgehogs. I definitely haven't used any pesticides or herbicides or any kind of chemical treatments in the garden. Oh, a little tangent from hedgehogs. Did I tell you about the bat I rescued from a water butt? You
did?
Yeah, rescued a bat from the shower a couple of weeks ago.
The shower? Inside?
Yeah, Debbie said, Paul, come, what's this in the shower? And I had a look, and yeah, it was a bat, and it was kind of stuck to the bottom of the shower. So I was like, oh no, a dead bat. So I kind of really carefully picked it up, and as I was taking it outside, I noticed it moved. I was in two minds about whether to take it to a wildlife rehabilitation centres. We've got one fairly local. So I basically put the bat in a slightly warmer place than outside. Mm-hmm. And a couple of days later, when I went to let the dog out, it was flying around the extension. So I opened the door and let it out, and hopefully now it's going about its batty business.
A little bit of wildlife rescue.
I wasn't sure that it was going to pull through. I think it was a little pipistrelle. Mm-hmm. That's a really important part of wildlife observation.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these things that go into hibernation or a state of torpor can look dead, and you don't want to dispose of them if they're still alive, obviously.
But on that note, let's head over to Tetbury, where I visited Mary Hinton. Mary runs one of the Help a Hedgehog hospitals from her home on the outskirts of the town, affectionately known as Hogwarts. I love that. That's brilliant.
Me too.
The charity was founded by a former veterinarian nurse called Annie Parfitt in 2008, and they've got 4 hospitals in total, the original in Brimscombe. Here's Mary. Mary, thank you very much for inviting us into your hedgehog hospital here in Tetbury. Tell us a little bit about hedgehogs and hibernation. What does it mean to hibernate? Why would a hedgehog hibernate when other animals don't?
Well, hedgehogs hibernate really because their natural supply of food disappears when the temperature drops and the ground goes hard, because hedgehogs are insectivores, so all the earthworms and the beetles and things, they all disappear when the temperature drops. So they have no food, so it's a survival mechanism basically, and also they're not built for cold weather. You know, they have a very thin, furry underside and their spines. So what happens is the temperature starts to drop. I mean, some bigger hedgehogs who've got plenty of fat might go down earlier due to the weather, but as soon as the temperatures drop, all hedgehogs will try and go to sleep. Well, it isn't sleep. It's a state of torpor. They appear to be asleep, but it's very, very clever. Basically, their body temperature drops down to about 4 degrees C. Wow. And they probably only have, 4 breaths a minute. So everything shuts down. So it appears that they're asleep, but it is different to sleep. It's a very, very deep state of torpor. And basically, their fat, their brown and white fat, keeps them alive. And that's why it's really key that they've got big enough and have had enough food to hibernate. And then they go into hibernation and they stay in that state while the temperature has dropped and there's no food, and then technically wake up in the spring. However, Some hedgehogs do, on milder days, or if they get disturbed, wake up. And they will then use quite a lot of their brown fat, which burns a lot of calories, in order to wake up. So that's why we ask people to keep putting food out.
Okay.
So that if a hedgehog does wake up on a milder day, they've got a source of food, because if there isn't, and they wake up, go out and try and find some food, depending on how much weight they've lost during hibernation, burning calories, then they may just go back to their nest and die.
Oh, gosh.
But it is basically, essentially, a survival mechanism to get through the winter.
So all hedgehogs will naturally hibernate. We wouldn't tend to see them if the temperatures have dropped.
It's unusual to see a hedgehog out during winter months, but it's not unheard of, and that's why we really ask people. I get asked a lot, shall I stop feeding them because I'll be encouraging them not to hibernate? No, I've been rescuing hedgehogs for 10 years now, and I take in small hedgehogs, autumn juveniles that are really not big enough to hibernate, and once they get to the right size, they go and hibernate in here, in captivity. I don't deprive them of food, and it is purely dictated by the temperature. However, I always have one or two that don't. No idea why, and that does happen in the wild, and increasingly over the years since I've been doing this, we really are having milder winters.
Yes.
Or if we have a cold spell, it's not a prolonged cold spell. So that's why it's not unusual to see hedgehogs out and about at night. I mean, hedgehogs out in the day is always a big no and a big concern. So yes, if people could keep on putting out the supplementary food and water, really, really important, just in case a hedgehog, who has woken up or hasn't hibernated, is looking for a meal. And you will not be preventing them from hibernating. That's a really important message.
So particularly if it's mild weather or just any time?
It could be lots of reasons. Mild weather is definitely one. But then, having said that, I've had hedgehogs that stay asleep no matter what the temperature does. I've got a thermometer. I'm obsessed about the temperature in my hospital. And it never freezes, but I can get down to 7 degrees. 6 degrees is the lowest I've ever got to in here. And they'll stay asleep. Others will wake up. So there's no exact science to that. But other reasons hedgehogs might wake up if their nest is disturbed. Then that might wake them up. And that's a really important message as well. If you do unearth a hedgehog that appears to be hibernating, you will know. Often people think there's a dead hedgehog because, as I said, everything slows down to such an extent. They're curled up in a tight ball to preserve the energy. But you will know if they're alive because just the mere fact of you disturbing the nest or slightly touching them with gloves on, the spines will move.
Okay.
And that's an indication that the hedgehog is alive. But the best thing then to do is cover it back up. If sadly you found a hedgehog curled in a tight ball in the middle of your grass, that is probably a dead hedgehog because they don't hibernate out in open spaces. But the thing to do would be to collect it up and then contact your local rescue just to be on the safe side, because, as I say, at first glance they do look completely motionless. But as I say, the spines do slightly move. That's why we're very careful in rescue, because they burn calories. The minute they start rousing, they're burning that brown fat to get them awake again. So we do, when they're in captivity, we do keep an eye on them during hibernation, just to make sure their weight hasn't dropped, there's not anything else going on. But we're very careful we don't do that very often, because we don't want to have them unnecessarily burning calories. So yeah, if you do unwittingly disturb a nest or you're worried about it, best thing is just cover it back up with the material that was there, and then just leave well alone. It's a really good idea to make yourself familiar with, where your local rescue is before anything like this happens, so that, you can always ring them for advice. I get people calling me all the time, often just for a bit of advice, just to give them a bit of help. But yeah, if you found a hedgehog out in the middle of, your lawn or in an exposed situation, that's not good. Yeah.
So how does a hedgehog choose its hibernation spot? What does it like? What does it prefer?
Well, obviously they love things like piles of dry leaves, open compost heaps. They might just scrape away under a shrub and then cover themselves in garden material. Any heap, if you've got a log pile, a bonfire that hopefully you're not going to set fire to, those are really, hedgehog hotels. And if you do have a pile that you want to burn and it's been there a considerable amount of time, then please check it, because clearly if a hedgehog's hibernating, it won't awake hearing you. And they don't wake up when they hear sparks and smell smoke. They'll wait for it to go away. And it's quite easy to check around the perimeter of a bonfire.
Yeah.
But they love going into greenhouses, getting into compost bags. Often people have no idea of that until in the spring. They go to get their compost and there's a hedgehog. They'll go into garages and sheds. So if you've had your door open, anywhere they can hide away really, because what they're really looking for is somewhere that's going to stay dry, hopefully, because if a hedgehog gets wet during hibernation and then it freezes, that's not great because then they're cocooned in ice. So they're looking for somewhere dry, sheltered, where they can make themselves a nice pile and cover themselves in it, and then they'll curl into a tight ball and sort of bury themselves in that. But sometimes they don't choose very good places, and sometimes they say very strange places, children's play equipment, you name it. If it looks like a suitable, yes. But if you've been raking up the leaves and leaving them in a pile, that's a really great thing. Or if you've got a corner in your garden where you've got some maybe grass cuttings and things like that and dry leaves, perfect. And it won't just be hedgehogs that hibernate in there. You'll get insects and slow worms and all sorts hiding in there. And log piles are brilliant as well. Yeah.
Are they territorial at all? So if I've been feeding a hedgehog in my garden, is it more likely to choose my garden for hibernation?
They're not territorial in the sense that they will always sleep up in the same place, but they're not overly brilliant with their brains. But they will remember where they live. They'll remember where there's a good source of food supply, which is why if you've been used to putting food out, during other parts of the year, please keep up with that, because then they haven't got to travel far. But yes, in all that time during the year where it's been maybe visiting your garden, it will remember, hopefully, where there's a good place. But they're not particularly loyal to nesting sites. They did do some radio tracking of a male hedgehog in London, in one of the London parks, over a year. And it had 13 different nest sites. Now, this wasn't during hibernation, but it was and it had 13 all round the perimeter that it used during that year. But there was no reason for why so they're not territorial in that sense. But they will generally stay within an area that they're used to, which is why when we rescue a hedgehog, we will try and put it back where it's come from.
And if they do wake during hibernation for any reason, will they go back to that same hibernation spot, or will they perhaps look for somewhere
Not
new?
necessarily. I mean, if it's been disturbed, definitely not, because that often happens during the breeding season. If the female feels at risk and the babies, she'll often move the babies to another nest. So no, not necessarily. And if the hedgehog's woken up and then it's travelled about a bit and got some food, it might think, oh, do you know what? It's quite nice here.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've never done any research, and I think that would have to be sort of proven by tracking, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
And obviously, hedgehogs do go into people's hedgehog houses in their gardens. But equally, I get phone calls from people who are very disappointed that a hedgehog is not living in their hedgehog house. But we try to say to people, use it as a feeding station.
Yeah.
And if you then, it's a nice safe place for a hedgehog to go and have some food, and then it might decide it actually wants to live in there. But yeah, they choose funny places, and it might not necessarily go back. And I would like to think that if it hadn't got a very good nest, that it would decide to make a better one.
So if I'm out in my garden during the winter, how can I garden as safely as possible to make sure that I don't disturb potential hibernation sites?
Basically, hopefully people aren't mowing and strimming, but if you're sort of poking about and you're maybe thinking you might be moving your compost heap or something like that, or you've got a big pile, something you want to move, then just check it. Pop a pair of gloves on and just poke about. A hedgehog curled up somewhere is not an insignificant thing. It's like a bowling ball. So pop a pair, and even if you don't want to touch it, you just with a garden rake or something, if you found something. And then if you have got to destroy wherever the hedgehog is, then please just find another reasonably suitable, similar spot for that hedgehog, cover it up with some leaves, some similar material. Because what happens in hibernation is they will sort of try and match their body temperature to the temperature in the environment. So it's not always necessary. If you found a hedgehog in not a very deeply, you wouldn't want to then be covering it in fleece and goodness knows what, because that's going to sort of interfere. And hopefully the hedgehog won't wake up while you move it. You just pop a pair of gloves on, move it, cover it up, and then
and it won't mind.
No, well, probably won't know. And you'd see the spine sort of moving, and just do it as quickly as possible, and then the hedgehog will be totally oblivious. The spine's moving, that's not a conscious thing. That's a reaction to it being touched. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out of hibernation, but it is a sign that it's alive.
Yeah.
But the research shows that they do burn calories doing that, and obviously you don't want to be losing calories unnecessarily.
When are they likely to wake up then? Is that again a temperature thing, a climate thing?
Very much so. I mean, over the 10 years of doing this, I've never had 2 springs the same, because what we try and do, we try and wait until spring has properly sprung, particularly if a hedgehog has hibernated all the way through, because you want the weather to have been established, and obviously the flowers and the insects and plenty of food and that sort of thing. So it varies. It has been early April, but it has been well into May. But it is dictated by the weather. I'm absolutely convinced of it. And that it's a similar thing, with the hedgehogs that we have in rescue. As soon as the temperatures start to warm up here consistently, they'll be, champing at the bit, ready to go.
You're incredibly busy here. I've never seen so many hedgehogs here before. What are the most of them here for?
Well, a lot. Basically, the advice we give people is that if you see what you think looks like a small hedgehog out at night, then we ask people to weigh them. And it's very important. There's not one set weight up and down the country, because it's very much dependent on the weather. And I keep an eye on the weather forecast the whole time, looking ahead. So at the moment, I'm taking anything in sort of 450 and under, because the advice that we get from the British Hedgehog Preservation Society in Hedgehog Street is that in the wild, a hedgehog can survive 450 and above. It's been a huge...
450 grams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's been a huge debate over the years. When I first got involved in this, it was a very strict 600, and that was it. But the research shows that no, if a hedgehog out in the wild, a healthy one, can then safely hibernate. But it really depends on the weather. Obviously, what's going on in Cornwall is completely different to what's going on in Edinburgh. So rescues dotted around the country. So once you've found your local rescue, depending on where you are, if you see what you think is a small hedgehog out at night, I would weigh it, keep it contained, and then phone your rescue, and they will advise you. And what we do here, anything that's underweight, it'll come in. And then what we do, we will then assess it. We will wait for a poo, and we look under our microscopes. We're always looking at faecal samples, because often there's stuff going on as well. There's a lot of hedgehogs here have got roundworm, so treating them for roundworm. And all wild animals carry a burden of parasites, but the problems come is when the parasites take over, and then they get secondary infections, and it starts to make them ill. So we make sure that hedgehogs are well before they hibernate. So once they come into rescue. And then what we do, if we have a mild spell and I've got a hedgehog that gets up to a safe hibernation weight, I'll release it back to a supported garden. So hopefully back where it came from, where the people are going to keep an eye, and support it with food and water, not in a contained way, but in their garden. I mean, they may never see the hedgehog again, but we ask that they've got maybe a feeding station, hedgehog house, and support it in that way. And then we very closely monitor it. But if it looks like the weather's going to be very cold, then we wait. And it's kind of that way. That's the way we go pretty much all through the winter. So I've got a mixture of little ones and poorly ones. And some of the little ones that come in then turn out to be poorly. Of course. Because I also obviously take in hedgehogs that are out during the day. And, hedgehogs out in the day, there are exceptions during the year, during the breeding season, the females out, collecting bedding and things like that. But on the whole, the advice is that if you see a hedgehog out in the day, take advice from your local rescue, and they'll be able to advise you as to what to do. But what we don't want to do is be lifting every hedgehog that is out at night in the winter and filling rescues up with very healthy hedgehogs, because it's not good to have them in captivity any longer than necessary. That's what we're about. We take them in to rehabilitate them and then release them. And also we don't just strip every hedgehog of every parasite and leave them and fill them with antibiotics unnecessarily, because their bodies need to be able to deal with those parasites. But yeah, unfortunately, and the ones you can see here that are in cages on the shelf, they're all on heat pads, because they are little ones, they're poorly, and I don't want them under any circumstances to go to sleep, to hibernate. And often when they've got a secondary infection, they're cold, so they need to be kept warm. And sometimes I've also got an incubator in here, which is what you would put chickens in and things. And I use that a lot, particularly treating the roundworm ones, because when they're not well. And that's really good because you can regulate the temperature. Sometimes with the heat pads, which is at one end, if they sort of roll off them. So that's why I have the two. I have my hutches, the full-size hutches, and then the smaller plastic cages with heat pads under them, because can't really put heat pads in there.
So the
So I've got a
450
mixture.
grams that we're talking about is only during the winter months, only when the temperature is dropped.
Yeah. During the rest of the year, basically, it's the out in the day,
Yeah.
which is the trigger. We don't really want, unless you saw an injured one out at night, obviously, or a hedgehog sort of flat out, looking a bit strange and not behaving as you would expect it to. But no, the rule of thumb, they are strictly nocturnal, very strictly nocturnal. I mean, obviously in the summer, well, evening is, although they stay light to 10 o'clock, I wouldn't be worried about a hedgehog out at 6 or 7 o'clock, because that's evening. And if it's been a hot day, they're going to come out and look for food and water. But as I say, really, the advice is really, find out where your local rescue is, whether it's just a hedgehog rescue or a general wildlife rescue. And once you know where they are, you can build up a relationship with them. Yeah. Often the rescues are looking for suitable release sites. Not to actually keep a hedgehog in your garden. It would have to be, a garden that they can get in and out of. We're not about, putting hedgehogs back in gardens to keep. That's not how it works. Hedgehogs have to travel. So, but yeah, form a relationship with your rescue, and then you know where to ring for advice. Because sometimes it is just advice. Don't always take in a hedgehog from somebody that phones me.
And what do you put down this level of busyness to? Has something happened this winter?
No, always busy in the winter, predominantly with the autumn juveniles, because, as I say, over the 10 years, increasingly we have our very warm Septembers, and that just triggers another breeding season. So then, of course, those babies that are born don't really have those months, weeks and weeks and weeks, to actually build that brown and white fat that they need. So that's why we end up with lots of little ones that are not going to survive. And the problem is it's a bit of a gamble, because we don't know whether we're going to get snow. We don't know when it's very unpredictable. But we have to err on the side of caution. Because what we don't want is to put back out there lots of little hedgehogs, which as soon as we have a hard frost or any snow, ka-ching, they're not going to survive. But as I say, we don't keep hedgehogs unnecessarily in here. And over the years, increasingly, when I first started doing this, we literally did hang on to a hedgehog right from when it came in October, November until spring. That doesn't happen now. If we know we're going to have a mild spell and I've got a hedgehog that's healthy and ready to go, then it goes. Which is great, because it's, we don't want them in unnecessarily.
So you are obviously available for advice. How can we help our local hedgehog hospital? Is there anything we could do?
Well, I mean, most rescues are charities, and they're run by volunteers, as ours is. So, always happy to have donations of food. So wet cat or dog food, cat biscuit. Dog biscuit is generally too big, so cat or kitten biscuit, and it doesn't need to be top of the range. It's quite good to have a mixture, because particularly in captivity, we try and get them used to a mixture, because that's probably what they're going to find in people's gardens. One garden will be whiskers, another will be something else. Other cat foods are available. So food donations. Most rescues will have a website. We've got an Amazon wish list. We've got a PayPal button that people can press, because we don't have our own vet. So our biggest bill is our vet's bill, and our drugs bill and that sort of thing, because we're not vets. So we use local vet who support us, and obviously, it's not cheap. And fundraising. I mean, we have loads and loads of volunteers who don't, they don't want to come and necessarily get hands-on with the hedgehogs, but they'll go and run a stall. And that sort of thing, because that's how we generate our income. So get to know your local rescue, and there'll be ways. I mean, maybe they'll have, maybe you can go and volunteer, go and see what they do. It can be a really lovely thing. I couldn't manage. I've got 2 volunteers, and I certainly couldn't keep going, because I work full time. And it's a really rewarding thing to do. And it may be that you're really good at admin. There's plenty of admin to do. It's not all about, actually very little of it is actually handling the hedgehogs. A lot of it is cleaning them out and preparing the food and that sort of thing. So get involved with your local rescue, because they'll be very happy to have your help, however small you may seem to think it is.
And just lastly, I love that you have bothered to decorate with Christmas decorations for the hedgehogs. I know they will be appreciating that.
Yeah, definitely.
Particularly over the babies.
I know. Well, and my volunteers, it made them smile, And there is one hedgehog themed one, but the others are, no. Festive hedgehog hospital, that's what we want.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, very welcome.
Well, you've got to love a lady who decorates with Christmas decorations for her hedgehogs, haven't you?
Yes. I didn't quite stretch to that this year. Maybe next year though.
So what's the one job then for this month that we should all be doing in our garden that's wildlife friendly, whether for hedgehogs or other visiting wildlife?
Keep those feeders topped up, whether it's for the birds or the hedgehogs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time to start ordering those seed catalogues, at least working out what you want to sow. I mean, one thing I'm doing this month is I've got some yellow rattle seeds. So this is a hemiparasitic wildflower. It's native to the UK, and it feeds on grasses partially. So it's a wildflower that's perfect to help reduce the vigor of grasses in your garden. If you're trying to have a wildflower meadow, then that's a really good thing, because the wildflowers compete with the grasses and usually lose. So when you successfully germinate yellow rattle, that can help other wildflowers find a spot to win the competition against grasses. And the thing with yellow rattle is it needs a few days or weeks of really cold weather in order to help them germinate. So a lot of people miss that window of opportunity. It's not too late. I think we might have a few more cold spells. So yeah, find a patch of bare earth, sow some yellow rattle seeds.
It has been unseasonably mild here in the Cotswolds, and it's finally turning wintry.
Yeah, we seem to have like a week of summer and a week of winter these days. Yeah, climate change is a factor that affects wildlife as well as humans. So
thank you very much. And thank you for listening to the Wildlife Community Podcast. Next time, we're talking National Nest Box Week with Welsh TV presenter and ornithologist Dan Rouse. So get those nest boxes at the ready. If you want to find out more about the podcast, you can visit our website at wildlifeworld.co.uk/blogs/podcast and enjoy your wildlife friendly gardening. Bye.
bye.